The Handler of Unfortunate Events. Lemony Snicket in conversation with Rosella Stephen. Daniel Handler is the author of 6 novels, including Why We Broke Up, We Are Pirates, and most recently, All the Dirty Parts. But today he is here as Lemony Snicket, and he is responsible for numerous books for children, including the 13-volume A Series of Unfortunate Events, the 4-volume All the Wrong Questions, and The Dark, which won the Charlotte Zolotow Award, and his books have sold more than 70 million copies and have been translated to 40 languages and have been adapted for film, stage, and television. Rosella Stephen is the editor of The Weekend, the Saturday magazine at the Hindu. She was earlier editor at Indulge at the New Indian Express, a lifestyle magazine she conceptualized and launched in 2006. She has served on multiple panels on art appreciation, luxury, fashion journalism, and leadership at various organizations. The Handler of Unfortunate Events.
Okay.
Okay.
Lovely to have you here, Daniel.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And as everybody here, I'm guessing we're going to be seeing a lot of literary giants over the next few days. But Lemony Snicket, to us, is a literary hero. And
Ooh.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a startling beginning.
Well, broken all the rules. When I was telling a publisher friend that we were, having this conversation, she said, "You please tell him I love his madcap books."
Oh.
And, how does he do it? And how does he, has he come across shocked parents and, shocked publishers and school librarians? And how did he get through all of that? He's made it easy for us, but it's still, a long way to go. So what's
A long
it like?
way to go to where?
To open up all these subjects.
Oh.
And I've not got to your adult books yet. I'm talking about
No, we haven't
yeah.
been talking for very long.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect you to have gotten to everything already.
Yes.
Yes, I frequently meet shocked and appalled people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm an American, so I frequently meet shocked and appalled people anyway, before they have any idea how I'm involved. Yes, I think people are very uncomfortable. I don't meet shocked children very often. They seem usually delighted. But I think definitely when you have a child, you have an urge to protect the child from dangerous things, and you get nervous when the child wants to explore those dangerous things. Yes. And so then you're shocked and appalled when a man, no matter how handsome and handsomely dressed, begins discussing such things on the page. I think that is shocking to them, yes.
So with Netflix, there's a completely different generation that's been introduced to Lemony Snicket, to all of these 3 lucky children who are also brave. How has it been?
That was quite a pause you took before the word brave. I couldn't tell if you were assessing their bravery.
No. They're brave. They're brave.
They're brave.
Yes, they're lucky though. They're brave. So
I always think if something terrible happens to you and you survive it, you're automatically called brave.
Yeah.
Even if you were completely cowardly the entire time. Because
By
no one's going to
default,
say
yes.
to you, you were a coward, but you survived. They're going to say how brave you were.
Thanks to you.
Yeah.
They're brave.
No, but I just think because bravery is something that I think about a lot, and it is often that definition, and it is because when I was a child, in school, we were all, in the States, we were all talking about our family's immigration stories, and my father fled Germany in 1939 to escape Nazi persecution, and my teacher said, "Oh, your father was very brave." And I went back and repeated that compliment to my father because he was a certified public accountant, and I don't think people called him brave very often. And so I said, "You're very brave." And he said, "Do you think I was braver than the ones who didn't make it?"
Oh.
And that's that's a deeply Jewish sensibility, that sentence, which is the environment in which I was raised. But the disconnect between cause and effect, right, that is so deeply instilled in us narratively that if we are brave, we will be rewarded. So therefore, people who have survived something must have been brave, and people who didn't survive it, it then implies that somehow they were lacking in some way, which is certainly not the case.
Unfair, yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you would bring up bravery, because that story is I think, very key in my own development and my own conceptualization.
So a lot of people over here would have been introduced to Lemony Snicket through Netflix.
Oh, yeah?
And of course, the Jim Carrey, the movie.
Yes, I remember that too.
Yes, quite well, I'm sure. And between the two of them, Netflix has given you a wider canvas. You've been able to explore a book in 2 episodes. And it's a wonderful watch. I'm sure everybody here will agree that, you know, it's a fascinating. We're really glad that the 3rd season has come, and you know, we can finish it up.
Well, I don't think we should assume that everyone here agrees,
No.
but they probably
No
won't.
one has.
They won't voice their disagreement in such an awkward circumstance. No one's going to say, "Not me, I don't like it much."
No, let's assume some of them have seen it.
Right, some of you.
So what was the process like to adapt, you know, the whole series, the 13-book series, for
Exhausting.
Netflix, as opposed to...
Yes, it took forever and a long time. And many of the conversations between the shocked and appalled people that I was discussing had to go on in the halls of Netflix, because I think they thought, "Oh, this is something that we've heard of before, and we should make a show out of it." And then the more the Netflix executives learned about it, they said, "This is really terrible." And I said, "Well, it's too late now. We've already started. We can't.
Yes.
There's nothing to be done." And the most exciting part for me was particularly during the 2nd and 3rd seasons. The writer's room took place in my dining room, so a small handful of playwrights, actually, people who came from the stage, sat around my table, and we had big boards up with index cards. Basically what goes on in my head, I think, when I write a book, of different people arguing and a big board with different index cards moving around, was actually happening in my dining room, and that was fun. That was a nice time.
And you're up for an award, you were mentioning.
Yes,
this.
the Writers' Room is up for a Writers Guild of America award.
Which is a good thing.
Yes,
It's
it
an
is a good
excellent
thing.
Yes.
Yes. Netflix, to celebrate the nomination, gave us all tiny little red leather notebooks that say #winning on them.
My God. Like subliminal.
Which, so first of all, what if we don't win?
Yes.
I shudder to think what notebook they'll give us then.
Yes.
And then also, I just feel a little self-conscious walking around with a notebook saying #winning in it. You know, if I'm on the bus taking a note, people will say, "Who's that man? Who's that arrogant man on the bus?"
But I think that now, a lot of people do know you as the man behind Lemony Snicket, or the agent
Most
of
people don't know
Lemony
me.
Snicket. No?
No. And I live in San Francisco, which is also where I grew up. So it's a wonderful check on one's ego, because someone will say, "Aren't you Daniel Handler?" And I will
Personal
say,
stories,
"Yes." And they will say, "Yeah, you used to date my sister."
Okay. Back to earth.
Yeah, right. Wah, wah.
So talking about the index cards, I believe some of the books, I mean, when it comes to technique, some of your books, you work with index cards?
I am. I'm a big
So-
fan of index cards, yes. I keep waiting to be offered some kind of endorsement deal
not
with an
happening.
index card company
No,
for all their television ads.
no, not happening.
Yeah, you just don't see that much. You don't see too many television ads for index cards. But I do. I like to write things down on index cards and move them around on a flat surface, such as a table, which I've found that if I do that at home, well, it leads occasionally to an argument with my wife, who is with us today at the festival, a wonderful illustrator, and obviously a terrific person, and whose birthday it is.
Yes. Happy birthday, Lisa.
Yeah. But now that I've said all that, I can say
Yes.
that sometimes when I'm moving around index cards on the dining room table, it leads to a conversation about what the dining room table is for, and whether or not a man should be allowed to spend many, many hours moving index cards around on it. But if I go and do it in a cafe, I think I look like a serial killer.
Yes. But you have your book as well, right? You carry a book
And a little
around
notebook,
all the
yes.
time.
Because if you carry index cards with you all the time, then
Yeah.
you've really given up on
Shifty,
life.
yes,
Yes. So I don't know why I'm doing it. For those of you who don't know what a notebook is,
Yes, this is it.
but who have nevertheless come to a literary festival, this is what a notebook looks like. This one says naturale on the, rather than hashtag winning.
Yes, much better.
Yeah.
Much better. So having said that, with Netflix, with the different technologies that have come in, how has writing changed for you? Has writing, the way you approach your stories a little different or all the same? Because you still use index cards, you still have notebooks.
Yes, I'm old-fashionedly
Yes,
analog
yes.
in that way, yes. I mean, I think what was interesting about writing for Netflix was to think about the ways in which people watch television.
Correct.
And what is interesting about an episodic development like that. So that was a lot of fun, and there were some rules that could easily be broken about writing for television and some that couldn't, and that was interesting to me too. But in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of writing, I think I'm just very boring. I write on index cards and in little notebooks,
But you
and then
also-
on legal pads.
Ah.
Yeah.
So you also
I'm sure
collect...
this is very fascinating for the audience. They were saying, I was sure hoping he would bring up legal pads.
No, they're not.
He's already brought up index cards.
And you also collect idiomatic phrases. I mean, fans of you, Lemony Snicket would know, that's that's one thing you expect. And you were telling me earlier today that you still collect those
Yes.
phrases,
well, it
whatever.
was, in fact,
tell
when
us.
when your bio was being read, it included the word conceptualized, which is not a word that we use in the States very often. And so I had to pause and think about it. And I said
Is that a good thing?
conceptualized. And you said, oh, yes, we use that all the time here. Is it
Yes,
true?
we use that all-
Conceptualized.
Yes, we conceive a lot
I
of
think
things.
we say
here.
conceived in
Yes,
America.
Yes. Yeah.
It's wonderful that we can appreciate our vast cultural differences. Yes, conceptualized is a good one. And I
Yeah.
learned, well, I'm not going to teach you new words here. That's very boring.
No.
But I'm reading Chateaubriand's memoirs. I thought I would bring those to India because he never made it here. He wanted to go, but he never made it. And there are many words in there of which I was previously unaware.
Some of them.
Well, I didn't know, for instance, that curio is short for curiosity. I mean, of course it is now that I knew that, but I didn't know that before. That was interesting to me. And then hierophant, I just learned that last night.
Okay.
Tossing and turning in my jet-lagged state, I read a little Chateaubriand, and I learned about hierophant, who is, where is it? Sorry, please hold. It doesn't matter what it is. Anyway, it's a word.
What? Okay, so we'll look it up.
It's my secret.
We'll find it.
Well, I mean, there's something about a new word appearing in your brain that suddenly you have a use for it once you've got it down, unlike hierophant, which I'm clearly still in training wheels on. But once you have it down, you see it everywhere, a word of which you were previously unaware, and it makes you think about things. So curio and curiosity made me, it turns out that mystery and museum are both linked in the if you go back far enough in their roots, and that's interesting too, to think about that a museum is presenting something which might have been a mystery to you previously. Offhand, you might think they were kind of opposites. A mystery is something we don't know where is in a museum, there it is, but a museum is bringing you a mystery. That's interesting to me.
Well, quite a few interesting things
Yeah. No, thank you.
when you're researching.
Thank you for agreeing. How awkward it would have been if you said, no, I don't
No,
find
I
that
don't
interesting.
agree, yes. Well, one thing you've always insisted on is to keep the mystery with stories. And then, of
Yes.
course, all the wrong questions has that, where a lot of questions go unanswered, and you've kept at it. And can you tell us today why having a bit of mystery is important to literature or to the creation of literature?
Well, I think that literature is a means by which we may ask questions.
Correct.
And I think particularly when you're young, you read a book and you want to think about it all the time. And that's one of the delights and treasures of writing for children, and one of the things that is so wonderful but also so bewildering about traveling, say, far from my home, as I am now, and to meet people who have been thinking about these stories, who are interested in them. And I hope that it is because of the questions that they offer rather than the answers that they offer.
Correct.
And I was here at the opening lecture of the festival here, and everything that the journalist was speaking about was making me think, oh, this is something I want to think about more. And to me, that's what literature is to connect to this enormous body of work that are asking these questions, rather than to offer some answer. Because we all know that when you read a book that has come out, sometimes it can be even a fairly recent book that has offered some grand answer, it is already ridiculous, right? It has already become dated, or it has already become wrong in some way. It is the books that ask these questions that continue to be so immersive and contemplative. How is it pronounced in India? Contemplative or contemplative?
Contemplative.
Okay, contemplative, okay.
But
I wouldn't
go
want you
both
to think I
ways.
wasn't from India.
No, no, no. It's okay.
Yeah. I want to blend in.
So one of the tips you give young writers, I mean, of course, it's you being, is to find a lot of time to write, get one book out of the way which has all the bad stuff, and then move on to the good stuff. And
I wish it were only one book, yes. I mean, you have to write many, many terrible things before you write anything good, over and over and over again. I see some of my fellow authors at the festival here who are, I can tell from their expressions that they sadly agree with me that you have to write so many terrible things. So I encourage people to write terrible sentences. When I teach a class, we all write a terrible sentence first. We put them up on the board, then we try to make them better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to write terrible things first. You're a writer, you know this.
To get better, correct.
Yeah, it's really terrible.
But something you've told writers is to find a dying person if possible, and that goes back to the first book you wrote, Work for a Dying Person. Now, can you get to that? I think you were an executive assistant to somebody who was dying, and therefore you got a lot of time.
I think death makes a story more interesting, for sure.
Yes.
Right? I mean, hopefully this is not a too tedious conversation for people in the audience, but one thing I know is if I were dead, if I die over the course of this conversation, this will really be remembered at the festival.
Yes.
If you say, oh, you were at Lit for Life, which was your favorite event? And you would say, well, I don't know about favorite, but a man died. That was pretty interesting. And so when you start to think about literature, a lot of people die in literature because a lot of people die, period. Everyone, in fact. So I think death makes a story more interesting.
Correct. Also, I think children are able to get irony better. Do you think that way? I mean, is that something you agree with? Because someone was telling me the other day about, an instance where you were interviewed by someone, and when he asked you to sign his book, you wrote down to whoever, future orphan.
A future orphan,
which,
yes.
I think I would take quite well, and a lot of children would take well, but I don't think the interviewer took that too well. So
no, some people have been shocked and appalled, as you've mentioned, by that. Yeah, I guess they would prefer to outlive their children, which seems terrible to me. But I mean, I think it's very natural when you're a child, if you are being cared for by people, you think, what happens if these people, if they went away? And once you've learned about death, you think, what would happen? This is very central. And there are many, many orphans in children's literature, I think, for this reason. Not only because there are many, many orphans, period, but because thinking about what would happen if these people who were taking care of me were gone. And there's something a little liberating about it narratively.
Yes.
If you're writing for children, it's much easier to have young heroes who are orphaned or who are otherwise separated from their parents, because then they don't need permission to do all the things that make a story interesting. But I also think it speaks to that deep anxiety and slight thrill of imagining of what would happen if you were alone in the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Depressing, but yes, thrilling too.
No, yeah.
Thrilling too.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes there are some fantastical elements in Lemony Snicket, the series of unfortunate
Sure. I don't think
events.
they'll be remembered as works of realism.
Correct. But sometimes you have Sunny, a baby, who climbs down an elevator shaft with her teeth.
Yes.
And you have all of this, which is, so fantastical. At the same time, I understand you are not interested in going towards fantasy as much as somebody would think?
I guess not. I mean, I don't. Categories of literature to me are basically a parlor game. You know, is he a romantic poet? Is she a realist novelist? These are kind of empty things to me. But I'm not drawn to a unicorn or a wizard particularly. But I like the idea of a baby climbing up an elevator shaft using only her teeth.
Correct.
So I don't know if that's more or less likely than a unicorn, frankly. But it just is more interesting to me.
Talking about wizards, you have an issue about wizards, right? I mean, I recall reading
have an
somewhere.
issue?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why are they
I would
there?
hate to say
Why
that
are they
to
not,
anger any
why
wizards
are
in
they
the
not,
audience.
Why are they not saving the world if they're there? I believe you had.
Yeah, well, yeah, you do think if there's a whole lot of wizards around in the world, it ought to be better, don't you think?
Why
Ought
are
to be
they-
really good sandwiches wherever you go, made by wizards. Yeah, but I think with the fantastical stuff with Sunny is more that I think babies are a source of mystery to me. Particularly when I started writing the books, I didn't know any babies socially, and I didn't have a baby of my own, and so I had to kind of piece together what babies were like.
Yes.
And it seemed to me that they bit things and that they spoke in a way that only the people closest to them understood.
Correct.
And as it turns out, I was entirely correct.
As you learned with your son.
As I learned, yeah, with my son
Yeah.
and other people's babies,
Yes.
you know, I was youngish when I started writing the Snicket books, so I just didn't know any babies, and then soon everybody had a baby. You know how that goes. Everybody has a baby, and then before you know it, everyone's getting married, and then everyone's dying.
Okay. Getting back to life and to your
Yeah.
son.
Oh, sorry. Right, babies. And babies are very mysterious to
Correct.
people.
Correct.
Yeah.
But your son as well, you know, was too young to read your books, and then of course you have the adult book, as we were talking about, all
Yeah.
the dirty parts, which you know is about the protagonist is Cole, and he's discovering sexuality and.
Yes. There's a lot of sex in the
There's
book.
a lot of sex. There's a lot of sex, and he was uncomfortable about reading it. So
Well, he was terrified to read a series of unfortunate events for a
Yes.
long time. And when he was young, he would say to me, "What are these books about?" And I would say, "They are about 3 children, and they lose their parents and their home in a terrible fire, and then they have to go live with a terrible man." And he would say, "No, that is not what the books are about." Which I had not been challenged in that way.
no.
I mean, various literary critics have criticized me, but no one ever said, "No, that is not what the book is about." And so I said, "Yes, it is, because you should argue with your own child all the time. It's a great way of parenting." And then he would just refuse to read them, sensibly, I think. But now he's read them, and he was very attached to All the Wrong Questions, for sure. But then when a book of mine, as you say, came out that was about sexuality, well, you don't want to read a book about sexuality when you're a teenager that your father has read. It's like an anxiety dream that such a book exists. So
Correct.
no, he told me he read enough of it to figure out if it contained as much sex as people said. But I don't know if that's true.
Well, but that
I leave him alone. I don't challenge him on what
you
he's
don't
read
ask questions.
from
You
me.
just let him be. Yes, it's yeah.
In general, I think authors don't challenge people who say that they've read their books. And so therefore, if you know any authors socially, or if you meet them here at the festival, just say that you read the book. It's fine. They never test you.
But you would have. Oh, really?
And I think it's very insulting when someone says, "Oh, I have your book." Or "I heard about it." And I say, just say you've read it. I'm not going to say, "Did you enjoy page 40? What did it say? Right? Did you catch
just-
the reference to you?
You shut it up. You smile, and you.
Yes,
that's
of course.
It.
You say,
Done.
"That's very nice of you."
Yeah.
I wonder if there's wine.
So about this, getting back to All the Dirty Parts,
Yes.
I understand that there was a bit of a discussion over it being a young adult novel,
Yes.
and it was with the publishers for a while, and it finally was not released as a young
Yes.
adult book. Now you've made your views about this quite clear. You've written in the New York Times about introducing books to young teenage boys. To teenage boys, not young teenage boys. Now, can you tell us a bit about where we should be headed with reference to literature for young boys, teenage boys?
Well, I don't think it's so much exclusively that I see it as literature for young boys, but that at least in the States, there is very solid evidence that there begins to be a gender gap in reading in adolescence. And this was borne out for me when I published a book for teenagers called Why We Broke Up. And I went around the States and Canada willy-nilly talking about it, and for the first time there was a very sharp gender discrepancy in the people who were coming to see me. Right. For the Snicket books, it was always plenty of boys and plenty of girls, and for Why We Broke Up, it was almost exclusively girls. In fact, there was hardly a boy there who was not there because it was required. That was the only time. There were a few schools that required boys to come, right. So there they were. But you can't count that as an audience if it's mandatory. As much as it's every publisher's fantasy to have something be actually mandatory reading, you can't really count that as your audience. And so I was interested in that. And if you are a man and you write for young people, you're often encouraged to come give your opinion on getting boys to read. I'm not a good person to ask because I was always a voracious reader when I was a child, so I don't really have any advice for getting boys to read because reading sold itself to me. But I began to look at my favorite novels when I was a teenager, and I was it's hard to believe, but I was a little pretentious as a teenager. I know, it's shocking. But I was, and so I was reading what my conception of very serious literature, and it was pretty serious literature, but as I reread it, I saw that often it was dealing with sexuality very frankly. And it wasn't as if I didn't remember that about those books.
You were not reading those books for that, obviously.
Right, that was not what I was reading them for, but that was what was interesting to me. And of course, sexualized content in the United States is the thing that is most often policed for young people. When books are removed from shelves, when they are sometimes canceled from publication, it is by far the most issue that people are hysterical about is sexuality. And so all the dirty parts began to be born out of that. It is a book about about a teenage boy and who is very sexually active and very sexually imaginative and makes his way in the kind of selfish way of that male sexuality is so often expressed in young men. And after thinking about it for a long time, the publisher of my children's books decided they just couldn't publish it for young people, that it would be policed so heavily as to not really be published. So it was published for adults. Oh well. Well,
but getting to noir novels, you have in the past talked about being inspired by Raymond Chandler.
Yes,
and
I like him.
By Charles Wilford. And with reference to Charles, I mean, he is not just a writer, he's many things. And similarly, you're not just Lemony Snicket. You play the accordion with the Magnetic Fields.
I do.
You cook. You do so many other things. Yes, you cook well. And then, of course, in San Francisco, and therefore and of course, people who've read, Lemony, a series of unfortunate events would, be familiar with the strangest of recipes sometimes. And then another book you're coming out with talks about how you can cook an egg well.
Yes, there's a long chapter about cooking an egg
Sunny,
well.
of course, has these great recipes with salmon.
I think food is a source of much delight and terror when you are a child, right? A huge family meal can be one of the most joyous things that you're at, or when your favorite food is cooked, it's such a highlight, but then maybe you go and visit someone else's house, or you're taken to a restaurant and suddenly there's something you don't want or you don't like, or that feeling when you're about to enter a place when you're young and your parent says to you, and you're going to eat every bite, and then in your mind's eye, there's like a raw squid being presented to you, or some other terrifying, there's a horse on fire and you have to eat it, whatever it is, that's your conception of it when you're a child. So in a series of unfortunate events in particular, and also in All the Wrong Questions, there's a lot of food terror.
Parsley soda, where did that come from?
I just tried to think of what a noxious soda would be. And San Francisco is a very food fetishy town.
Absolutely, yes.
And so there's often things that seem like that should delight you for dessert that are made savory instead. So chocolate with horrible things in it, soda with horrible things in it, ice cream with horrible things in it. San Francisco is going through some kind of schizophrenic sweets episode, I don't know.
Right now?
Please help us.
So, unlike Hunger Games and, all of those, Twilight, for instance,
Yeah.
when the movies came out, newer readers, where people were introduced to these books, they went back looking for the books. But in the case of, the unfortunate events, do you think, people would have to go to the book first and then go to the series? Or have you had, newer audiences come to you and say, I've not read the book ever, but it was Netflix that did it for me?
I don't know. I mean, I think people experience them in a wide variety of ways, but certainly the idea that you could spend more time with the stories, I think, has been appealing to young people because that is often where your mind goes. So I think sometimes they'll see an episode and then they'll read the books, or vice versa.
Okay.
I don't know, but it's been interesting to me to see.
And you've also played a very good role, I mean, it's a strong role right now, mentoring poets rather. And
Yeah.
you have, this company you've started, which again connects to Lemony Snicket. I mean, to
Yes,
Netflix.
in a way. So
The funds from
have
that.
always been a fan
Yes.
of poetry. I read a lot of poetry. I would say most Indian literature that I've read is in your poetry tradition rather than your novelists or nonfiction writers. But and then when they were filming the Netflix show, I was up in Canada where they were filming it, and it's very strange, but one of the things that they did was that every morning they gave me some money. And they said, here's some money if you want to buy yourself a sandwich, so you don't have to buy a sandwich and then give the receipt to Netflix and then they pay you back for the sandwich. Here's some money. But first of all, there were two curious things about it. One was that I was on this movie set all day long working, and so there was no time to go get a sandwich. And then the other thing was that they gave me the money in American cash, and we were in Canada. Now, there are many Americans who are confused by this, but I bet everyone here knows that those are entirely different countries, America and Canada. And so you can't spend American money in Canada, what with it being Canada.
so it was saved.
Yeah, it was very, very strange. And so they gave me this money, and so I would put it in a pocket of my suitcase in my hotel. But I guess I should have put it in the safe. And then over the stretch of time, I would spend a little time there, I'd fly home, I'd spend a little time there, I'd fly home, and I began to amass this kind of great pile of American cash, which was alarming to me. And it seemed undeserved. And so I thought, well, let's use it to
Yes.
publish some poetry. So we did that.
And because of that, you, I understand, read about 100 and 1,200 poems.
Yeah, I had not reckoned with how this would go, really.
Yes.
So, because
Yes.
I don't know anything about publishing poetry, but I said, that
Yes.
sounds fun. We'll publish some poetry. We'll call it per diem press, because that's what they
Yes.
call the money that they give you every day, a per diem. And so then I announced you could send poetry. It had to be in English. That was the only thing I said, because that's the language I can read. And then I was overwhelmed by the amount of poetry
Right.
that people sent me. I was not prepared for that. It was in a huge box in our living room, which led to perhaps another argument
Yeah.
with a wonderful woman whose birthday it is today,
Yes. Note.
right? There were some who have a point of view that the living room should not contain an enormous box full of envelopes full of poetry that people have sent you just because you had some harebrained scream to publish it. And so I would take a handful of them and I would go to a cafe and I would read them, and not once but twice the barista at the cafe said, "Are you okay?" Which I think was the expression that I was reading during some of the poetry that was not chosen for publication. I could not help but have an aghast expression for the poor quality of it. But there was a lot of very good poetry. So I was only going to publish one little chapbook of poetry, but I couldn't choose between three, so we published three of them. You can order them if you're so inclined.
And one of them is an Indian, isn't he?
Yes, he's lived all over the place actually.
Correct.
But yes, Rowan Chattery. And I'm a big fan of his poetry. It's very intellectual and spiky. There is also Aristo White, an African American woman who is very experimental, and there is Elizabeth Clark Wessel, who is American, but she lives abroad. She does a lot of translation, European translations. She lives in Europe, and her poems are very friendly. They're all very different, and just the wide variety of poetry has been a delight. And And then I wrote poetry when I was very young. I thought I was going to be a poet for a while, as we all do. And
You've not been encouraged by your publisher to kind of get those poems out?
I think hardly anyone encourages anyone else to write poetry. I think that hardly ever happens. And in fact, when I was studying poetry in college, my poems were getting longer and more narrative, and my poetry instructor kind of took me very gently and said, "I believe you are writing in the tradition known as prose." And explained to me that people even read prose, that you might make a living from it. He was trying to convince me it was good news. But it's been wonderful to participate in poetry this way, not only as a reader, but as a publisher of it. That's fun.
It is, it is. And could you tell us a bit about the books that are coming out soon? There's
Oh.
Bottle Grove, there's Poison for Breakfast, which we're all waiting for, I think.
Oh, we are? We are? Oh,
We
that's
are,
nice.
aren't we?
Oh, thank you.
Yes, we are.
I can't wait to go home to my publisher and say, a room
Get it
full of
out
people told me
fast.
they were waiting for it. Yes, there's a forthcoming Snicket book called Poison for Breakfast. This spring, there'll be another Snicket picture book called Swarm of Bees. It is about a swarm of bees. And then, yes, there's a Daniel Handler novel. I don't know how to say that out loud. I'm a Daniel
You've
Handler
said it.
novel. That sounds
Yes.
strange. But anyway, it's called Bottle Grove, and it is about some of the changes. It's about 2 marriages, but it is also about some of the changes that are happening in San Francisco because of the tech industry. I can't imagine that you would know what that's like. Enormous changes due to the tech industry. But try to imagine it, if you will.
We do, we know.
Yeah, I know.
Yes. So talking about picture books, you brought out Dark, which is such a fantastic book because
Thank
because of the subject.
Yeah.
And it's something that's, a book like that opened things up for a lot of publishers here with
Oh.
themes like that. So what are other themes that you've come across that, were a bit unconventional and, required
I guess,
someone of your...
I start with a story. I don't start with a theme. So John Clausen, who is the illustrator of The Dark, is a wonderful person, and he was showing me some things that he had drawn, and one of them was a boy looking down the stairs of a dark basement. And I immediately had this idea
Yes.
about being afraid of the dark, and about the dark being a character in the book, and so that was where that went. I didn't think to myself, what's a difficult theme one must tackle? I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if the dark at the bottom of the stairs was talking to you? And the answer is no, it would be terrifying.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not interesting, it's horrifying. But by then it was too late. So, and Swarm of Bees ends up being about anger. It's about how angry you can get, how suddenly it can come, and how your anger can kind of rage around, which I think when you're a young child, when you're a toddler, you have these temper tantrums that kind of come out of nowhere, and sometimes your whole family doesn't know how to do it. You're not encouraged to express that anger. You don't know where that anger goes, and it's very much like a swarm of bees.
Which we're waiting for.
Yeah.
All right. So among all the different actors who have played Lemony Snicket, there's Jude Law, and there's Patrick Warburton, and there's
Yeah.
you, of course, with the audiobooks. Who does it best?
Well, I've seen many elementary school productions
Huh.
of various Snicket books acted out, and that's always what I like. There was a Japanese exchange student, a girl who played Lemony Snicket, who I watched not so long ago. She was a 4th grader. I thought she did a really wonderful job.
All right.
It wasn't as visible a production as Netflix, say, but
So she will put Jude Law and Patrick and everybody else to shame.
yeah, my wife liked Jude Law a lot because I think the
I'm not
idea.
surprised.
Yeah. And in fact, when Jude Law was recording his narration for the movie, I had him record a message of love for my wife, which she still has on her iPod. And Patrick Warburton, he just did a wonderful job. What we learned in making the Netflix show is that many actors, as with the writers who came from theater, were best to express the kind of outsized mode of it. And another thing that you do in theater is you learn your lines. Oftentimes in movies or in television, the acting is done so piecemeal. You do one little bit, and so you just memorize a little bit. And for Patrick Warburton had done a lot of stage work, so he was used to memorizing a whole paragraph of ridiculous material, which is frequently what we gave him. So I thought he did a good job.
Yeah. And he is. I think we would agree that he did a good job, a very good job.
Yeah,
Now,
I'm glad. let's not tell him if we disagree again.
Ha, yes. Now, is there a Jiminy Cricket connect to Lemony Snicket? And Jiminy Cricket, for
I don't
those
think
not,
so.
No?
I never liked
No?
Jiminy Cricket, but when I made up Lemony Snicket, I never thought about it. But of course, then everyone asked me. But
No.
I never liked him.
You want to stop? No way.
That's
That's it. No.
Just when you're about to have fun, a bug comes and tells you that
talking
you
bug.
shouldn't do it. That's not my idea of a good time.
But there is a Lemony Snicket cocktail, I think, which you have.
There are many Lemony Snicket
Yeah.
cocktails.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you collect cocktail books, don't
I
you?
do. I like a cocktail. When my wife and I lived in New York, we were very, very broke, and we had a trick that we had a vintage cocktail book, and we would say, today we're making Singapore slings, and we would say to our friends, you bring this, you bring this, you bring this, and we didn't have to provide anything. We had to provide ice.
Well,
And
that's
everyone,
easy.
of course, would get full of cocktails, so they wouldn't
Yes.
realize. They would say, oh, what wonderful hosts Daniel Heller and Lisa Brown are. They're
Yeah,
wonderful. They
yeah.
provide everything. And we would think to ourselves, we've done nothing. You're lying on our
You're
floor
right.
now,
Oh.
grateful. So I do like an old cocktail book. And then many years ago, before I had written children's books, Lemony Snicket was a phrase that we used for a cocktail that we had invented ourselves. But then now, often wherever I go, someone has made a Lemony Snicket cocktail. And it causes some etiquette anxiety because someone will say, we've made a Lemony Snicket cocktail, now try it.
Oh,
And then you have to say, well, that
Pressure,
was the most
the pressure.
delicious thing I've ever had. And then you have to have an expression.
yes.
But we all know that expression when someone has made something for you that is edible or drinkable and you try it and you have to like it. You know, you have to raise your eyebrows right away, no matter what feeling of horror you have.
Like how
No matter your
right
body
away?
is instinctively spitting it out. You have to, oh, this is, I'd like to store it in the side of my mouth. It's so delicious. I must tell this napkin about it right away. Yeah, so that's the cocktail.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's terrible.
But I'm guessing there's a book that's coming out soon.
A book
No.
of
Of
Lemony
Lemony
Snicket
Snicket
cocktails?
cocktails?
I don't know. I don't think my publisher has said, let's try to sell alcohol to children. I don't think that's...
Okay. Daniel Handler's version of Lemony Snicket cocktails.
Well, we invented the Lemony Snicket cocktail because we had a friend who had a lemon tree, and if you have a friend who has a lemon tree, you are brought hundreds of lemons all the time, more lemons than you could possibly do anything with. So we had no money and 1,000 lemons, and so we squeezed them all, and then we said, "Oh, everyone, bring over the liquor," and then we mixed it with
that's
lemons,
how
you
it
know,
happened,
and
and that's
then
how
we
it-
just called it
yeah.
a Lemony Snicket. Yeah.
So those poems, you've written, I will love you as the da-da-da. Is there one special, line that you would want to tell us? I mean, narrate now. I will love you as the,
Oh,
all of
goodness.
those. Come on.
Is there one?
A special one.
This
Have
is
I
an
put you in the
anxiety dream that I'm
spot?
having right now. Would you please recite something beautiful for the crowd? No, gosh, I don't know. I don't think I could recite a love poem for this entire crowd.
Yes.
I would have to choose a separate
But-
line for each individual.
But they're lovely, those.
So let's begin.
Yes.
You, sir.
Which is when,
I'm going to love you first, sir.
Yes. We'll see if somebody from the audience could kind of recite any of those, the ones you've written.
Yes,
So-
and my violently jealous wife would be in the audience saying, "What? You said what to whom?"
We're going back to the hotel room right now.
That's yes. Maybe it'll end in death.
Yes. Or love.
What an exciting event!
Makes Okay, any questions for Lemony Snicket / Daniel Handler?
It was lovely hearing you.
Oh, thank you.
I watched on Netflix
That was sweet of you.
a series of unfortunate events.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the characters? Each one is so fantastic.
The Baudelaires, yes.
Oh, the Baudelaires? Or
Yes.
oh,
The bank
gosh.
manager, everybody.
Oh, thank you. Well, I don't have a job. So most adults here have to go somewhere every day and do something. I have pity for you all. But I can wander around eavesdropping on people like you. So I do that. I do a lot of eavesdropping.
I know, for all the dirty parts, there was a lot of
Yeah.
bus rides and...
I recently heard a very old person, this is in my notebook, it just happened a few days ago, right before I came here, I heard a very old person say, "I've been alive for so long, I would like to try being dead for a while." What a fantastic line. So that, you know, there's some character, right? That's
Yeah,
a character right there. You
absolutely,
can kind
yes.
of begin to build a character all around someone who's been alive so long they'd like to be dead for a while. So I do a lot of eavesdropping, and then I think, as we all do, you know how we waste time thinking of people who have wronged us a long time ago? You think, oh, they insulted me 17 years ago, and I'm still
Die.
stewing about it. If you're a writer, that counts as work. You think about those people, and then you put them in a book, and you think, I've had my revenge at last. Yeah.
So there you
So be unemployed, I guess, is my message.
Yes, next question.
Hi, sir.
Who would have thought?
No, who would think that would rally the troops?
Hi, sir. In the recent past, children's books with darker themes, such as a series of unfortunate events and The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, they are gaining wide popularity and they are revolutionizing the genre. This paradigm shift shows that times are changing. So, what's your view on this?
Goodness, what is my view on that? I don't know. I just think it is interesting when terrible things happen. I know it is terrible also, but it is interesting. And I mean, children's literature in America certainly goes in cycles where there's authors begin to tell kind of very dark and scary stories, and then there's some panic in the librarian community or the educator community, and then things get very saccharine for a while, and then that slides back down. But I mean, I think that stories are invented by the people who tell them, and they're telling their stories,
Correct.
and that there are many terrible things that have happened. And so I grew up hearing stories of the Holocaust because that was where my family was from, and so that filtered into my own sensibility. What I wanted to read when I was young was something that acknowledged that darkness in the world. And I think no matter how sheltered a life you lead, and certainly my own childhood was very privileged and very sheltered by anyone's standards, but there was still had that shadow over it that was worth thinking about, and I think that's where stories come from.
True, and you've given us, you know, fantastic stories that are cynical, ironic, and not campy at all. And yes, they do make us think, especially the Daniel Handler books as well.
Well, thank you.
They're lovely books. Any other questions?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
So I grew up reading a series of unfortunate events.
I'm sorry about that.
I had a lot of fun. And I always thought Lemony Snicket was the actual person. And it hasn't been very long
I'm
since
a
I
disappointment
realized
to a great number of people.
Yes.
I understand that. I've always understood that.
that. So I was wondering, who do you like more, Lemony Snicket or Daniel Handler?
Who I like more? Oh, goodness. Who I like more?
You're going to be judged either way.
I'm not that fond of either of them, to be frank.
Who
You
would
seem
rather
nice,
be?
though. No, I mean, I identify with Lemony Snicket probably more than I do with Daniel Handler, frankly. Who I like more. I don't know. I
But
have
Lemony
to
Snicket
go
is
home
more
and
fun.
think about that.
Is Lemony Snicket more fun?
More fun?
Yes.
Well, he's in a lot of danger,
Yes.
and he's read too many books but is essentially a coward. I have no idea what that feels like. Gosh, I don't know. I would have to go home and think about that. Who I like. I've never been asked that before. Who I like more. Let's ask my wife who she likes more.
What do you think,
Later,
Lisa?
we'll ask her
Never,
later.
Later.
Yeah.
You don't want it out.
Let's not have her
No,
embarrass
no,
me here.
Yes. Any other questions?
That was a fascinating.
Who is the Beatrice that you address in every single book? I mean, I don't think it's your wife, but
You think it's my wife?
I don't think
You don't think it's my wife?
No.
Interesting. You don't think it's my wife?
No.
It's so fascinating to me. I must say, this is It is a delight to be here, and this is what is delightful about it, is to travel somewhere far, to still be kind of jet-lagged and full of melatonin and espresso. And someone says, I don't think it's your wife. Thank you for that. Thank you for not thinking it's my wife.
I mean, obviously, you say that Beatrice is dead while your wife is clearly alive.
Oh, yes. No, that is a big crucial difference between my
Yes.
life
Yes.
and Beatrice. Nothing gets past you. Old eagle eyes, they call you. Well, the story of Beatrice, who is the dedicatee, as conceptualized
Yes.
in a series of unfortunate events, and the story of Lemony Snicket and why
Correct.
he is concerned with her, and the story of the Baudelaires all kind of come together like ill-constructed railway cars, getting closer and closer together. So people write me all the time about who they think Beatrice is and who they don't think she is. Does it come naturally to you not to think that she's my wife?
I mean,
Or do you think she's my wife and then you say, no, I must not think that. I must not think it. We'll talk more later.
Okay.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Have there been any unfortunate events in your life that you have handled with dexterity?
That I've handled.
Dexterity.
Oh. Goodness gracious. No, I don't. I mean, I think I've survived them all so far. Knock fabric.
Yes.
So therefore, I can said to be brave, right? I've survived them. No, I don't know. I mean, everything terrible that happens, I try to write down. So I'm very busy. For an unemployed person, I really fill my days. I don't know. These are fascinating questions. Thank you for them.
Just reading your books all the
You spent
13 of
your
them.
middle school years reading your books. Yeah, I would say a universal constant is that middle school is misery, no matter where we are.
Yeah.
And you
So,
spent them reading the work of Lemony Snicket. Look at you.
There are lots of pages in the book that deals with so deep psychological, philosophical things. I remember reading like onions have many layers and you have to peel through them, and also about mobs being angry and violent and everything. What was your intention leaving those books for? In those books which are meant to be for children, did you really think that they'd understand what was written on them?
Well, I think it is true that to have an appreciation of the Lemony Snicket books, you have to have a sense of deep philosophical ennui and irony. And so when people say, at what age should I start to read
Exactly, the
one of
cookie
these books?
story.
One of the other authors at the festival was just saying, what age should I start my child on them? And it is when the arrival of irony and philosophical ennui, and some people get that very young.
Yes.
How old were you when you got it, do you think?
8.
8 would have been my guess with you. And then some people never got it. Right? So yes, I think, I mean, the only thing that enabled me to survive middle school was irony and philosophical ennui and, you know, the band New Order. But, thank you. But yes, so I think that you can reach that age at a very young age. You can begin to think, what if terrible things happened, and isn't it a little funny?
Correct. And when people ask you how old should children be to read Lemony Snicket, to read, and then I think you've had one of those experiments with cookies. You've said, give them cookies and have a poisonous cookie or something.
Well, oftentimes, if I'm at a party and there's a plate full of cookies and there's a small child who's taking a cookie, I say, you know, one of them is poisonous. So have a cookie now, because the chances as the party goes on of getting the poisonous one increase. It's a mathematics lesson, really.
Absolutely, yes.
And
if the child's all for it, then you have
right,
11.
and then if the child finds that delightful, then they're of Snicket age. And if they say
So that's
a
it.
creepy man is telling people that there's poison at the party, then they're not, as I've had to explain to the authorities on a number of occasions.
And there we have it. Thank you very much,
Oh, you're
Daniel
welcome. Thank you.
and Lemony.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Lit Fest team as well for bringing Daniel and Lemony down. I believe
Yes, and a round of applause for my charming inquisitor, please. She was so wonderful.
I believe it took 6 years for our LFL team to bring him down. I mean, so I'm glad they made it.
I'm so
They've
happy
been
to
in
be
talks
here.
with your people for a long time.
Thank you for a
so
fascinating conversation and your fascinating questions.
Thank you very much.